had the power to go back to Ireland. The topic of this talk today is a reminder to everyone that while it's difficult to identify where in Ireland an ancestor may have come from, you may already possess the power to answer your questions in your private records. Here is a family chart compiled by a relative years ago. Doesn't have any place names or any dates. It just has names connecting husbands to wives, their children, and who their children married, etc. These are the descendants, part of it, of Morris O'Callaghan and Mary Mahoney. And it details that their daughter Margaret wed a man named Dennis Buckley. Mary Ann, their daughter, wed Garrett Lynch, and then their other daughters, Katie and Elizabeth, apparently married a man named O'Connell for Katie and a man named Riley for Elizabeth. But we don't have first names for either gentleman. Their son, Morris, married a woman named Margaret Sullivan. The sources to consider. Since 2015, many Irish sources have become available online. Several of them are free, some are behind a subscription wall, but irishgenealogy.ie is a Republic of Ireland government site. It has a wealth of civil registration records of births, marriages, and deaths, which began universally in 1864 on January 1st. Protestant and non-Catholic marriages began earlier in April of 1845. So if you have non-Catholic Irish heritage, you may be able to find a wedding record a generation earlier than the 1864 start date for the rest of the island and records. Ancestry is a subscription site, but they have quite a collection. It's amazing how much access they have to various records. There's the Irish Census is at the site there, census.nationalarchives.ie. That's primarily the 1901 and 1911 Irish censuses. The earlier censuses were primarily lost over the years. There are a few fragments that survive and you can search them there. But for most people, you're going to start with the earliest full census of 1901. Roots Ireland is a subscription site that has a wealth of church records. And what church records aren't at Roots Ireland are at the irishgenealogy.ie. There's a few small areas that were not included, and we'll be discussing that today. And then familysearch.org is the Latter-day Saints led website, and since family history research is part of the Mormon faith, the idea that family can be forever and ordinances can be performed even on those who lived before us, the church has a vested interest in making the films and microfilming original records and then making those records available not only to church members but to the public at large. So that is a free site, and those records are being digitized, and many of the digitizations are already available to view in the privacy of your own home on your laptop or desktop computer. So starting with irishgenealogy.ie through a church record search, we're looking for a baptism, marriage, burial. We did a search for Mary Mahoney, and we did restrict it to baptisms and the 1800 period and County Cork, and 4 girls come up, and they are Mary, Elizabeth, or Eliza, Catherine, and Margaret. So Margaret seems familiar. She's my great-grandmother. She was baptized on October 2nd, 1859. It does not have her date of birth, but we would presume that she's a couple of days old given the practice at the time, so she may have been born in late September or early October. Her sisters, Catherine and Elizabeth, were older than her. They were baptized in March of 1857 and June of 1858. And then Mary was younger, and she was baptized on the 13th of April, 1862. We know that they have a brother according to the family chart, but he's not listed. Doing more research by clicking the button to go into the the listing, the record for Catherine Callahan shows that her father was Morris Callahan and her mother was Mary Mahoney. So we know we have the right Catherine Callahan from the family chart, the one that apparently married Mr. O'Connell. And her godparents are James Smith and Mary Hegarty. But we can also do a search for this family through ancestry.com. And we did a search for Callahan, and we knew that Watergrass Hill was listed as the parish on the previous record. So now we had a place and some dates. So we were looking for children whose parents were Morris or Mary, Morris Callahan. So we did an MAU asterisk, and then we did Mary Mahoney, and then we did Callahan, CAL asterisk, in the Watergrass Hill parish. And we found 9. There were 5 boys that don't show up at the other website, but do show up here, including Morris Callahan, the second to the bottom, who was baptized on the 25th of February, 1853. So now we have a more complete picture. We're not able to find a marriage record for this couple, and there may have been earlier born children, but we don't find any in civil registration birth records, so we assume that Mary Ann is their final child in 1862. Here is the actual baptismal page for Catherine from 1857, and we see that she was baptized on the 15th, and then she's in the upper right-hand corner next to the key, Catherine, Morris Callahan, and Mary Mahoney, and then the sponsors are James Smith and Mary Hegarty. The other key shows that James Callahan, who was baptized a few weeks earlier, interestingly, his parents are Patrick Callahan and Kate Mahoney. And the question is that just a coincidence, or could there be a relation between one or both of the parties? Could the Callahan brothers have married the Mahoney sisters, or could Callahan cousins have married Mahoney sisters, or mix and match back and forth? Is there a connection, or is it just a coincidence? Ireland's organized its civil registration by districts, so small locality would collect surrounding areas, and then various districts would be organized into a larger group called a superintendent registrar district, and that's what this map shows. That's how they're indexed and collected in Dublin. And the key at the bottom in County Cork shows that the Mallow, Fermoy, and Cork superintendent registrar districts all intersect at the right side of that key. So we're going to keep that in mind as we proceed. We did do a marriage search since we knew that Catherine allegedly married a man named Mr. O'Connell or Connell. So we're looking for marriages between a Catherine Callahan from 1870 to 1911. See the key pointing to that. And the spouse second party name is Connell. And we didn't put a registration district in. And sure enough, there's only one that fits our parameters. So on April 25th, 1899, John Connell married Catherine Callahan in the Cork Superintendent Registrar District. And then you click it, and then it goes to this, and then you click on image so you can see the actual record. And sure enough, the Catherine Callahan in question is from Napogue, which is in Watergrass Hill, and she's the daughter of Morris Callahan. So we found our gal, and she did indeed marry a man named Connell, Mr. John Connell. And we were also able to look up for her siblings, found 3 of the 4 siblings getting married that were on that handwritten sheet. On February 3rd, 1885, my ancestor Margaret married my great-grandfather. She was age 25, and they got married at the bride's home. On February 27th, several years later, her brother Morris married. He was 44. And then on the 31st of January, 1899, youngest sister Mary Ann married Garrett Lynch. She was 36. And on April 25th, again, 1899, Catherine married, and she was age 42. And we know the age is based on what year were they baptized and what year did they get married. And, we had months, so subtract, and those are the ages. Those ages are not listed on the Irish record. And we are able to take advantage of some of the records that were available to assist the registrars in the 1800s. So each district would have a listing that would show what townlands were included in the area that he was responsible for. So this is a good way to know the various geographical divisions that existed. Location isn't just important in politics and real estate, it's also important in genealogy research. So the two of the sisters married at the family home in Napogue, so they registered to the Fermoy district. The chapel would register to the Carignavar district, which is in the Cork Superintendent Registrar district. So these three areas are all intersecting. So there's three different districts of Rahan, Ballyhooly, and Carignavar, and they're each registering to Mallow, Fermoy, and Cork. And then there's also Kappa, which we'll talk about later, because that's where the Connells live when they're a married couple. So it's in the Ballyhooly district, but a different electoral district. So here are some townland intersections. So the three keys, the lower key is Liravarig, that's where the Buckley family lived. The right key is Commons, which borders Napogue, where the Callahan family lived. So obviously the Buckleys and the Callahans were neighbors, or at least lived in neighboring townlands. And then the upper key is Tureen, and that is in another parish altogether. The two lower keys are in Watergrass Hill, and the upper key is Killavullen. We're able to find Morris Callahan in the Griffiths valuation from 1853 for County Cork, and he's living with several other people. They must share a lease, but they each have their own house and such. But there's several other Callahans and some Hegartys, which isn't surprising given the fact that we saw the name Hegarty in the baptismal sponsor role. I'm sure they're either a very good friend or probably a close family member. And here are the death images. We did searches for Morris Callahan and his wife Mary O'Callahan, and remember that in the Irish custom, Callahan and O'Callahan are the same person. The formal name is O'Callahan. There would be times in Irish history where Gaelic versions of names were illegal, so they would drop the O or drop the Mick, but it's still the same family. Some names brought them back, other names did not. But there's Morris Callahan. He died on May 6th, 1885 at Napogue. He was married. He was a farmer. He had pneumonia for 4 weeks. And then his son, Morris, is the informant who was present at death. And then underneath, in 1904, so 19 years later, on March 5th at Napogue, Mary O'Callahan died. She's a widow. She's 84. She's the widow of Morris O'Callahan, farmer. And she died of senile decay. There was no medical attendant. And then Morris O'Callahan, his Mark, again, son, is present at death. So we're able to see that Napogue can be spelled various ways. So you have to be open to the Irish townland names. They're from the original Irish language, a Gaelic language, and it doesn't always translate into English perfectly and simply, so the spelling can be quite a bit off. As we mentioned earlier, the 1901 census is readily available online, and here we found the John and Catherine Connell family. Now, as I mentioned, Catherine was 42 and she married in 1899. Here, 2 years later, she's saying she's 38. But more impressive and more surprising for me was that there's a 10-month-old child in this household. I was amazed that a woman who was already 42 at the time of her marriage, had not been married previously, was able to conceive and bear a child at age 43. And living with them is the husband's brother as well. And then 10 years later, Kate is now widowed, but in addition to bearing a child at 43, there are two more sons, ages 9 and 8. So apparently she had a child at 44 and a last child at 45. And this is, again, for 1900 and 1902, there is no Pergonal, there is no surrogate, there is no Clomid, there's no in vitro. So she just did it from being a woman of good Irish stock, apparently. And as we see on the bottom, there's a Morris Buckley nephew living with her. And that was interesting because, as a widow with young children, she would need access to a farmhand. And this young man was her nephew, and he works as a farm servant. He's originally listed as servant, but then crossed off as nephew. And then if you look up his family, you find that Dennis and Margaret Buckley are living with their children. There's a Maggie Callahan living with them. Margaret is born 10 children, 7 of whom are living. Only 5 are listed there. Morris is living in his aunt's household, his widowed aunt's. And then the question is, why? Who is Maggie Callahan? She's a niece, and why is she living there? Well, then looking at Napogue, which borders Luravarig, we see that the Morris Callahan household is a widowed household. And in addition to his 3 children, he's living with Mary Ann Buckley, his niece. So the story was that Mary Ann was sent to live with her uncle after his wife died, and then his 9-month-old daughter was sent to live with her aunt and cousins, so that she grew up knowing her cousins more like siblings and her siblings more like cousins. And Aunt Mary grew very resentful because she had all the drudgery of being, his servant, and none, wasn't paid, etc. Although she must have earned some money, she eventually saved and moved to Ireland, or moved away from Ireland to the United States, even though she was the older daughter and traditionally would have had the dowry and married a local farmer. She chose to leave and come to the United States. But if you're not finding people in census records, remember that, those number of born, number living, take them at their word that they're true. In this case, the other 2 children were able to find them and identify them. So all is not lost if someone doesn't show up. But here are the birth certificates for the boys. Again, they don't list the mother's age. I tabulated it myself with the help of Ancestry.com's timelines and such. But they lived at a townland called Kappa. And then here is an example of a Roots Ireland transcription for a baptism for the second son, Morris. And then ironically, he has a child on his birth page, a girl named Nora Callahan, who's a few days older. She's born at Kappa. Her parents are John and Kate O'Connell. And it's only by looking and seeing that her parents are Kate Duggan and John O'Connell that you can identify that there's 2 John O'Connell families, both with wives named Catherine, both living at Kappa, both bearing children in the same week, but they're not twins. So you have to be open to always look at the full page and not be too quick to jump the gun.